This is something you're never going to learn about in welding school, but believe it or not, these are tools that you can use for TIG welding. Not typically are these tools that you would see recommended for use with TIG welding, so where and how would you actually use a tool like this? Well, after decades of experience and TIG welding production, I use tools like these all the time. Joints like this here would probably be something exactly like I would use these tools for, something like this, and even something as simple as this one. Looking at these joints here, can you even guess where I would actually use them? Let's look at this joint right here. This is a fillet joint that's been thrown around a piece of pipe. With a joint like this, we've got a couple lines that we want to look really good. The first one will be creating a round shape to follow around the circumference of the pipe. And then the second one will be right here. Getting the round shape of the weld to flow nice and perfect is very tricky, but I've got tips to help you using these tools here. The first tool we're going to use here is a tungsten scribe. It helps a lot, especially with aluminum, because it can scratch a line much more easier and much more clearly to see as you are welding. You can get these super cheap. I've used this one for literally years in my shop. If you don't have one, you can actually just use a piece of tungsten that you have sharpened to a relatively sharp point. And then next up, when we are done welding, we are going to use this tool right here. It's a really fine draw file. I've got a whole set of really nice fine needle files here, and these are really great for what I'm about to show you. These are two tools that are going to make a massive impact on some fine details and consistency with your welding. So looking at this joint here again, what are a couple problems that somebody is going to be faced with? We talked about what we wanted as far as the lines being done perfectly. These are typically really difficult for a lot of people to do perfectly. What's common is that the line around the circumference of the pipe is going to be uneven. And I refer to this line as the gravity affected line. This will be the line that is obviously affected by gravity the most. Filler material is going to be pulled to this edge more than the other line up top here. Depending what size of pipe you're working with, there's going to be multiple stop-starts that you're going to have to deal with. So it's going to be relatively common that these lines are going to go in and out and remain inconsistent. And then there's this line, and again, with multiple stop-starts involved, it's very common that you see this line become inconsistent. So we want to make sure that we make these two lines look as consistent as we can, especially with one another. We want this one to follow the shape of the pipe diameter perfectly, and we want this one to look super straight and consistent as well. Think about it as if this was a normal straight fillet weld. We don't want edges that go in and out or up and down. We want everything straight and even. So here's the great thing about working with aluminum. It's such a soft metal. When you're getting going with learning a joint like this that you want to remain straight and super consistent, we're going to use our first tool here. Let's start out with a really simple joint configuration like this lap joint here. Now looking at these lines here, what was the line that I talked about being the most troublesome line that we saw in the example earlier? Can you remember? That's right, it was called the gravity affected line. Now with this joint here, it is common that you're going to see this bottom edge or the gravity affected line going in and out remaining relatively inconsistent. This is very common when people are first learning this one. It's all good. Sometimes the filler material is not going to blend all the way out to the bottom edge. This creates an inconsistent line that just generally doesn't look as good as we want it to. So before we get going with trying to weld this one, let's put our scribe to work. Now after I've tacked up this joint here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a ruler and I'm going to just gently run my scribe along the bottom edge to give myself a guide to follow when I'm welding. Like I just mentioned, the bottom line is going to be the one that's most difficult to get situated, especially at your starts. So having this line here is going to be a great guide for giving you or me something that you can follow. And as we're doing so, we want to make sure that we have proper placement, proper size, and proper shape of the weld. With aluminum, it's awesome. This scribe's super easy. You can see it really clearly as you start welding. And if not the entire length of this one, this is going to be a great thing to just help set a guide for you, especially with your starts. Like I mentioned with this one, it's very common that people have troubles getting the bottom line to drop out and blend properly to the bottom plate. A lot of the time they'll get this weld started and they aren't really sure if they've got it settled all the way out properly at the bottom, so they start moving, and then only to finish and see that they've had a poor start that's basically caused problems right from the get-go. And what this does is it clogs up this line on the entire pass on the bottom edge here, the gravity affected side. The same can go for fillet welds also, as well as other welding passes too. And these photos that we're looking at are from my online TIG welding students before they started in my online TIG welding program. And in the program, we actually introduced the scribe in like the first exercises so we can use this as a certain guide that they can follow. And they end up getting results like this after following some of these tips. You can see how much this simple tool has helped them to get some good looking stuff. Hang on a second, come here. These are all just a few really small tips that you're gonna learn in my TIG welding program online. These are the most strategic and comprehensive TIG welding programs that you're gonna find online ever. And if you wanna get good at TIG welding but you don't have time for welding school, these classes are for you. And they're cheaper than welding school too. Learn in the comfort of your own home shop or wherever you practice. Learn at your own pace, at your own time. There is no set schedule. There's no expiration date. You pick up any time where you left off. I have had thousands of people go through these programs. And if you wanna try out my TIG welding courses, you can check out free classes that are on my website right now for free. And the cool thing about this is you actually don't even have to measure it. It doesn't have to be like exactly at the toe of the weld. It can even just be a rough approximation of a measurement that I will basically weld over so that after you finish weldment, you can't even see it. Now here we go. Let's get into some trickier stuff. When I go to weld around a circumference of a pipe like this, guess what? I'm gonna bust out this scribe before I even start welding. Take a look at this joint here. This one's cool. I did this as a welding lesson on my channel a little while ago. It's a crazy exercise. You gotta give it a try. Before I welded it, I actually scribed a line on the base plate as a rough guide that I could follow. And during weldment, because that one was a little bit tricky as far as positioning, it helped me out a ton. Like we talked about, round fillets can be so difficult because the gravity affected line can become quite inconsistent. Running the scribe around the shape of your pipe helps as a guide so much. And again, this doesn't have to be done perfectly. It's just something that's gonna give you a guide so that you can get some better consistency. And then now take a look at this thing after weldment. The bottom line, or the gravity affected side, stayed really consistent and it mimicked the shape of the pipe really well. Okay, that's all great and all, but what about the top line that we talked about? Remember how I said that can be another line that becomes inconsistent as well? Here's where the other tool that we talked about comes into play. Watch this. Now, you can absolutely scribe a line around the top edge around the pipe as well. I have this old ruler here, it's super bendy. I don't remember where I actually got it from, but it really helps with stuff like this. What you can do is you can wrap it around the circumference of a pipe like this and then scribe away. Now, this definitely helps. However, I do personally find, and some of my students have also said this as well, that trying to follow two lines instead of just one is a little bit overwhelming for some people. But some people do enjoy having a couple different ways that they can check their consistency, so you might want to give this one a try and see what you think. Or there is this thing here. I'm going to use this after weldment. Matter of fact, take a look at this one here. I have already used the file to finish my weld. Can you see how I used it? You can't even really tell, can you? Here's what I did. I want this line to be nice and straight, and even though we've already talked about it, we're gonna use this tiny little file here to cut a detail line into the weld after I have finished it. And what this is gonna do is create the look of the line that we want. Now I know some people are gonna be freaking out hearing me say this, but hang on a second, check this out first. This file is ultra fine. The lines that we are gonna create are not gonna affect any of the welding or the base material at all. The lines that we are going to create with this file are not going to affect the weld itself or the parent material at all. I would typically only do something like this for a very cosmetic weld where everything needs to look absolutely perfect. My goal with this is to not cut into the parent or base material at all with it. This can lead to structural problems and possible failure later down the line. Obviously, we do not want that. What we also want to make sure we do not do is we also do not want to cut a shelf into the top of our weld like this here. Obviously this is exaggerated, but you get what I'm saying. This would essentially be the same thing as creating the same problem known as cold lap. This is basically where we have incomplete fusion in between the filler material and the base material. This again can lead to failure or cracking or whatever down the line. What we are going to do is literally just skim a tiny line right at the transition of these two materials here. The file is basically just disrupting the surface of the weld a little more aggressively than if you were to do the same thing with your fingernail on an aluminum surface. This is so fine, we are literally just making the tiniest scratch. What this is going to do is deflect the light that we see reflecting off of the weld. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna give the appearance of a line that is straight and perfect. You can even do this with your scribe with some of your work after you finish on straight stuff. Again, you can set up with a ruler and very gently just run a line down the length of something. This is gonna help to create the consistency of a bottom or top line. Again, I can grab my trusty pink bendy ruler here, and I can even use this to mark a few areas I might want to line these up. Obviously, be very careful and very strategic when you do this, like a surgeon. You do not want to scratch up the nice weld that you just did. And like we talked about, we do not want to compromise any integrity of the welding or the parent or base material. Then after, here's what I'm going to do. Check this out. I'm going to grab my piece of Scotch-Brite hand pad. You can mask off your weld if you really want to get crazy and do it like this. And I'm going to spin this around the pipe very gently to remove heavy scratches from the file and kind of blend everything in. Or you can hold it in your hands and do it dental floss style. Now, one major thing that I did well ahead of time to help prepare me for this step was I grabbed my piece of pipe and I ran a Scotch-Brite pad around it before I even tacked it together. This gives the pipe a really clean grain direction to start with. And then after welding, when I do my last couple detail steps like we've talked about here, all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna redo this little section with my Scotch-Brite hand pad. It's gonna blend in the file marks so we don't see them as clearly. And now I've got my lines detailed super clean. This is why planning and preparation are so important, my friends. Watch this episode here. Remember I talked about this one earlier? This one is huge for going around crazy shapes, especially when we want to keep up the deadly consistency like we've talked about here today. Go watch that episode right now. Do a random act of kindness for a stranger today. I'm Dusty James, Phil and Chill. Talk soon. Peace.